Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Chai Time Data Science Show. In this episode, I interview co-founder and CEO at Decision.ai, Dan Becker. You might know Dan as the creator of Kaggle Learn, where he enabled or actually democratized a lot of machine learning courses that he created on Kaggle.com. It's still one of my favorite platforms to learn, so please go to kaggle.com/learn if you're curious to check them out. In this episode, we talk all about Dan's journey into the field, Dan's work at Kaggle, where he created Kaggle Learn. We talk a lot about MOOCs, open online courses. What does it take to become a data scientist, and how can MOOCs come into the picture for you? How can you think of ideas or projects that can help you build a portfolio? We also talk about Dan's new venture, Decision.ai, which he's just recently started. Dan already has been a contributor to Keras and TensorFlow and has done projects, consulting projects for 6 companies in the Fortune 100 list of companies. We, of course, talk about how that was helpful in Dan's new journey. If you'd like to check out Decision.ai, please go to their website, which is Decision.ai, or go to why.decision.ai, where you can find out what tasks are they dealing with. For now, here's my interview with Dan Becker. Please enjoy the show. Hi everyone, I'm really excited to have a global educator on the show, Dr. Dan Becker. Dan, thank you so much for joining me on the Chai Time Data Science podcast.
Thanks for the invitation.
So I want to talk about how you got interested into machine learning. You've worked across different roles over the past few years. Before we talk about them, I think you did computer science education followed by a PhD in economics. Where did machine learning come into the picture for you?
So I, in some sense, I've had 2 periods when I did machine learning. So my first job out of college, this was in 2000. So machine learning was not nearly as well developed as it is today.
It was
my
the
first job.
Period.
What's that? Yeah, that's right. And I was working for a company that was trying to use neural networks to help companies find the best times to post items on eBay.
Okay.
And that was our business model, and we didn't really know what we were doing, both because the state of the art for neural networks in 2000 was not what it is today, and then also we're not on the cutting edge, and so that was roughly a failure. And I switched from using neural networks to just saying we're going to create simple counts of different variables and very simple data visualizations, and just very, very not even regressions, but just very basic statistics. And that was successful. And so I came out of that in 2001 or 2002 saying, machine learning is never going to work. It's never going to catch on. It's totally just the future is going to be, we're going to have a lot of data in the future, but the future is going to be that we just do very simple things with our data. And so in 2004, I started a PhD program in econometrics, which is sort of statistics for economic applications.
Okay.
And I used linear regression and logistic regression, things that today you and I would say are pretty basic or pretty rudimentary. And then in 2000, I graduated in 2009. Around then, Kaggle, which was still just getting started, had a competition with a $3 million grand prize. And I figured I've just spent 5 years working on data analysis and building better models. And so I entered that competition. And if maybe, I don't know exactly what there were, let's say there were 1,000 people when I started that, my first submissions were in like 950th place, so like really very much towards the bottom. And I was so puzzled because I thought that I was doing the best techniques or approaches there were, but machine learning had developed so much in the intervening 9 or 10 years that I had to go back and start learning machine learning at that time, because and part of it was that I was just by nature sort of competitive, but I couldn't believe that I was like towards the bottom in this kind of competition, and that inspired me to really get back into machine learning.
And could you talk more about that experience? I know the results were awesome. What was that period of working on the competition like for you?
Yeah, so I started in almost last place, like I said.
Yeah.
And I started reading the forums. I think that reading Kaggle forums is such a great way to learn machine learning. I got Elements of Statistical Learning, which is a somewhat advanced textbook, and it was a really long competition. I don't think Kaggle has competitions that are nearly that long anymore, but it was 2.5 years or so, and I just would slowly creep up and up, and I had a job that I was working on all day, but at night I would just work till, I don't know, 2 a.m. On the competition, and on the weekends I just dedicated all my time to this competition, and I'd gone from like 950th place to about 10th place with a year left, and then I was hired by a company that does analyst consulting to work for them, continue competing in the competition, but do it under their company name, and then also to train their consultants who are using very classical models, so their consultants could do projects with really modern machine learning. And that was great. That was great for so many reasons. One is it meant that I got to dedicate like a lot of time during my day job to doing Kaggle competitions, and after that, like I progressed very quickly. We ended up in second place, but a lot of that was like, if you can dedicate time at the job to doing Kaggle competitions, you'll do much better. And then the other thing that was really amazing to me, and I think it's probably the one thing that I carry with me as an advantage most even today, is that because I was working with their consultants, and they have consultants working on all these different applications, I got to see someone doing marketing for a financial services company, and they would come to me and say, hey, I want to do machine learning, but they would describe their use case, and then I would work with them to do it in a better way. And then someone else would be doing something about preventive maintenance for a manufacturer. And so I just saw all these different use cases because there were all these different teams who were working with me. Yeah. And so it was really nice to get to see the breadth of how machine learning is used at different large companies. And then also, yeah, we had a great result. I mean, it was great, and also in some ways it was frustrating. So the way they had that competition is there's a $3 million prize if the best score was better than a certain score. So no one got better than that score. So the grand prize ended up being $500,000 for first place. We were in second place, which had no prize at all.
Okay.
And so that was disappointing. And I think that I, at the end of that, said I could never pour my heart into a Kaggle competition or pour my time into a Kaggle competition the way that I did into that one first competition, because I worked so hard and ended up, with a sense of disappointment. And after that, actually, a lot of what I did in all the subsequent competitions was try and build. There weren't a lot of like AutoML products like there are today, and so all the subsequent. Most of my subsequent competitions I tried to do in this AutoML way, where it said, what if I don't even look at the data? Could I build a model that in this very programmatic way builds models that are competitive? And at least that way, I don't know, I thought that was just like a really interesting problem to try and solve. And that was what I did for a while after my first competition.
Interesting. I also want to ask you, many people wonder if they should invest time into Kaggle. How did you see the results that you achieved on Kaggle affect your profile to maybe recruiting managers or the outside world? Was that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things when I first started competing in Kaggle, I wanted to use it. I had a job and I had a PhD, but I wanted to use it to improve my, as you said, recruiting profile and to have more job options, especially because I wanted to move to Colorado, which is where I live now, but I wanted to have more options in a different place. And so it worked for me. And in fact, probably I got a job at this analyst consulting company, EXL, because of competing in Kaggle. Then I got a job at Kaggle because of how I done on Kaggle, and then I got a job at Data Robot because of how I did at Kaggle. Then I got a job back at Kaggle, which had been bought by Google as a result of Kaggle. So for me, every job I've ever gotten, not ever, but every job I've gotten in the last 10 years has been because of Kaggle. And at the same time, I think that it's probably, most people would say this is going to be how I'm going to improve my profile. I think that competitions is probably not a good or strategic decision for them. You need to be probably in the top 5 or so percent for it to really like advance your career options, and maybe you need to be in the top 1%.
Yeah.
And 95% of people just tautologically won't be in the top 5%. And so I think you learn a lot. I think that it is, some people really enjoy it. I know that I got really pulled into it. I think that if you want to build a resume or a profile, the best thing you can do is, and still I think the right place to do it is on Kaggle, is to find data sets that are things you're interested in and do work that you find interesting. So if you really like, let's say, cricket, then you should make, and there aren't, how many cricket data visualizations are there on Kaggle? Like, not a ton.
Yeah.
And so you could create the single best data visualization on cricket in the world. And because a data visualization is something that like you can show to someone, even if they're hiring, but they're not like deep into machine learning, and they're just like, wow, this guy did something really interesting. And like they can process like what you did and why it's interesting. I think that's actually much more powerful. If you want it to be machine learning, you could do predicting, what's going to happen in the next cricket match. If you're in the US and you really like American football, it could be American football. If you really like movies, it could be about movies. If you really like literature, you could do some sort of textual analysis on literature. And now you are able to do something where you don't need, it's not quite as competitive. You don't need to be in the top 1% in this very competitive field in order to make progress towards something that will get you hired. And so I think that's probably a better strategy for 99% of people. If you're going to be in the top 1%, then you should do that.
We'll come back and talk about this topic a little bit more, but first I want to discuss how should people educate themselves. You created Kaggle Learn. First, what even led you to making that decision? I'm sure there might have been a few MOOCs floating around at that time.
Yeah, there are a lot of MOOCs floating around. I'd already created a course for this website, Data Camp. I created a deep learning course for them. First of all, the courses that exist for the most part are informed by what is taught in academia. Most academic professors, there's not like a nice way to say this, most academic professors have never held a data science job. Most of them have never even consulted. Not only have they not had a full-time job, most of them have not even worked closely with solving a problem in industry that someone is willing to pay for. And as a result, they repeat a lot of academic stuff, which is good if you want to get a job teaching more people the exact same thing. But if you want someone to pay you because you're going to solve problems for them, a lot of the MOOCs cover stuff that I think, if anything, a distraction. And I always felt that the number one, okay, so you let's say your goal is either to get a job or to get really, really good at data science. So if you have one of those two goals, first of all, the way to get really, really good at data science is to get a job, because once you get a job, then you can spend whatever you were spending before, now you're spending an extra 40 or so hours doing data science, so you're going to improve much more quickly. All right, so now, no matter which of those two goals you had, really your shorter-term focus should be getting a job. To get a job, I think it's really important that you have a piece of work that you can show someone that looks like the things that they want to pay you to do, so they can look at it and go, this guy actually could do a really good job. This guy or girl could do a really good job at the job that I needed to do. And so that means you really should be focusing a lot of your time on creating portfolio pieces. Now, if you're starting, you don't know any Python, you don't know anything about machine learning, then you can't just, for me to say, well, just create something interesting is not that productive. And so I created Kaggle Learn to say, what is the quickest path to get great at data science is to get a job. The quickest path to get a job is to create a portfolio project. What is the quickest path to teach someone just enough that they can do really interesting work? Most of the courses on Kaggle Learn are 4 hours. And that means you take a MOOC, most of them last more than 4 weeks. Most of them last month. Most of them you'll spend months on them. And so if we prepare you to do interesting work at the end of you put in a couple afternoons, that is just such a huge win. And that means you get to those more interesting parts sooner. And so that was the goal. And I think it's also nice, if you are if you're using a platform that charges you for their courses, they really need their courses to be substantial because that's how they make their money. And for Kaggle, we could make really short courses because our goal is for you to just do interesting stuff. And so it's much easier for Kaggle to create very short courses that help you just do interesting work than it is for someone where that's their business model.
You mentioned the end goal of getting hired, which I'm sure is for everyone, but there's this way of how these MOOCs are sold, which is they also have a really nice marketing, which makes you feel, hey, maybe I need to know this. And I call it the infinite learning loop. How can we avoid that when you keep feeling that, hey, maybe I need to take another course before I'm good enough, or maybe I also need to know this, maybe I need to know TensorFlow, PyTorch, productionizing, all that.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that this, especially for someone who has spent most of their life in school, if you're 20 or 25 years old, you've spent most of your life in school.
Yep.
And so the thing that is most natural for you is to keep taking classes because I think that the thing that a lot of people struggle with in various forms is procrastination. And I was reading a book about procrastination. They say that one of the times that you procrastinate most is when you're about to start something that's sort of uncomfortable. And so if I said you really should try and get to doing a project that you are going to share with the world that's going to make you uncomfortable, you go, maybe I'm not ready. And then I can say, as a result, I'm going to take some classes. And the classes could be hard, but I'm not uncomfortable. It's sort of going back to something that I've done a lot of in life, and I'm not concerned I'm just going to utterly fail at it. And so I think that you are better off. I think that to take a lot of classes in many cases is a form of procrastination. And you should say, I'm going to start a project. If I had to take, an afternoon of classes, that's fine. I'm going to start a project in the next week. If you start a project in the next week, you have not put off. If you start with that as your goal, you have not put off moving towards the next step very far. Now you're going to get there and you're going to say, okay, I saw something that used computer vision. So I'm going to look at the thing that did computer vision, and it uses TensorFlow or it uses PyTorch. And so at first, maybe I'm going to start by copying and pasting some of their code and playing around with it and seeing if I can get somewhere without stepping back and taking a whole class. And if you can, great. And if you can't, then that's a moment when you say, what is the least coursework I need to do so that I can make progress on doing an interesting project on a topic that I care about that happens to, let's say, use computer vision, if that's what I want to do. And so at every point, there's the founder, who's also a great Kaggler of one of these websites that does a lot of data science education. So that's Data Quest.
Okay.
Founder is Vic Perchuri. I think incredibly highly of him. And he told me that he really likes a model where someone who's learning, instead of the teacher pushing information onto them saying, okay, you need to learn this, now you need to learn this other thing, you need to learn this other thing, you instead say, I want you to start a project and you're going to pull the information you need at the time you need it. Or I guess if we phrase it in computer science terms, it's like lazy evaluation. I learn it when I need it.
Yeah.
And also I think that you're going to have much, just I think, I've read a lot about how people learn, and I think you're going to have much higher retention if you learn something because you know where you have the context of where you're going to use it and you're excited to apply it. Whereas if you just take months of coursework on end, it's really hard to retain that and you're not using it on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, there's also flip side to it. Many people haven't found their interesting project ideas yet. What advice do you have for them? How should they come up with ideas?
I think that they should think less about what do I need to do to get hired, even if that is their big picture goal. And for a moment, say, what is a topic in life that I find interesting? And can I find data about it? And I guess the other thing is Kaggle has, I don't even know anymore, but probably 10 or 20,000 data sets, I would guess. Kaggle has so many data sets. And so if you're looking for inspiration, just browsing Kaggle data sets is one way to get there. But I think it's even better if you said, what's something that I find interesting? It's workouts. Well, can I find something about weightlifting? And maybe say, what is a way for some, if I'm someone who cared about fitness and weightlifting, like, can I find someone's data where they looked at their progression over time? And can I find a data set and predict when they're going to get injured or when they're going to have a lot of progress? And if that's a thing that you find interesting, then like work on that. And I think you'll enjoy it more. You'll find it more interesting. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
There are probably some people who just struggle. If I said, well, what's something that you care about? What's something that you find interesting? There are probably some people who struggle to answer that, but I think most people could answer that.
Yeah. And maybe if you cannot find a data set, why not go ahead and create one? Why not scrape an online forum where you have fitness advice or bodybuilding advice on there and create a data set and see what you can do with that?
Yeah. And that's especially, like you said, if you found a forum, I think you'd find something super interesting there.
Yeah. I think that there are multiple ways of it. I was just discussing with a friend. Maybe if you're a foodie, why not go ahead and scrape reviews, do something with it. But once you start playing with the data, ideas start to come, then you start thinking of it in unique ways. I think that's where, like you said, the passion or interest aspect of it comes into the picture.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found when I first did my first Kaggle competition is if you'd ask me ahead of time, how many days of work do you think that you could do? How many hours of work do you think you could do before you just say, I've like gotten to the edge of everything that I consider doing and then I'll be done? I think I would have said, I don't know, after, I didn't have a lot of experience with it, but I would have said, I can imagine doing 20 or 30 hours and then being out of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But once you've put in 10 hours, you've like just working with a data set, you go, I've got all these new ideas. And then once you start using up all those ideas in the process of implementing, then you'll get new ideas. And so for the most part, like if you scrape data at some point, while you're scraping it, you will say, God, I noticed that this one person is like the person who posts the most. It's kind of weird. And you'll have some idea that's specific to them, or you'll just like keep noticing things that will spark your curiosity, for the next like part of your project.
To give an example outside of it, even with this interview series, I keep getting surprised of how many new ideas I can come up with. Even while doing this interview, it's sparking a lot of ideas in my head, and I can confirm while you invested into something, And if you're passionate, you'll keep finding ways of doing new things.
Totally.
Now, coming back to Kaggle Learn, how did you decide the curriculum, and what sort of efforts did it take for you to put out the final product with the 4-hour short time limit of it?
Yeah. The first couple courses was pretty obvious what to do. So Intro to Machine Learning would be the first thing. I think that maybe we did something about pandas. And part of that, I guess, is also for people who are thinking about how to get their first job. I was talking to a friend about his difficulty hiring data scientists. And I said a lot of people can talk about the math, but we spend 80% of our time cleaning data in pandas. And so if someone isn't efficient at using pandas, then nothing else matters. And so we put together a pandas course soon after that. And then a deep learning course when Kaggle, it's funny, only 3 or 4 years ago, Kaggle did not have GPUs. And when Kaggle started having GPUs available in their notebooks, I put a deep learning course using TensorFlow. And then for a long time, it was a combination of one, just like if you look at what we have now, what heuristically seems like it's missing. I think I was always surprised the extent to which our beginner courses, you expect them to have more traffic than advanced courses, but it was so much more traffic. I think our most advanced course is probably the machine learning explainability course. And something like Intro to Machine Learning would get 50 or 60 times as many users as machine learning explainability. And so that really made us think that we should build a lot of beginnerish courses because there's just so many people who want them. And then, over time, we had other people who joined the team. And so some of it was just asking them, what's something you want to work on? And I would try and find the intersection of something that someone is excited to teach or create. What do we need? And I guess really those two. And then early when we first released Kaggle Learn, we didn't have any of the automated checking of your answers or automated feedback. You would just write your answer and maybe we'd have an explanation afterwards. But a couple of years ago, we switched, and this was largely an effort by someone who was working with us, a guy, Colin Morris, who's a great software engineer and data scientist. But he built a lot of the functionality so that when we ask you a question, you write some code to try and answer that question, and then we examine your code to either give you suggestions on how to improve it or to tell you that it's right. And I think that even today, a lot of the effort is not in the explanations. There are so many, whether it's on Tor's Data Science or other Kaggle notebooks, there are so many places that you can get reasonable explanations. But we work really hard on trying to make the hands-on exercises interesting exercises. A lot of them are scenario-based. So instead of saying, how do you get the R squared from 0.7 to 0.75, we say, you've been hired to figure out where the right location is for a new Starbucks. How do you use a machine learning? How do you do this one thing to use a machine learning model? And then how do you explain that to the person who's not a data scientist? And so we've really tried to use more scenario-based exercises so that, one, it's interesting, and two, if someone is looking to get a job, they actually know what it means to do work in the field of data science. Spend a lot of time trying to come up with more interesting exercises, and then also writing that checking code to give users feedback on what they do.
Okay. Can you mention a few things that you're most proud of what Kaggle Learn has achieved through the huge audience and community that it got received by?
Yeah. I think that there are a few things. So one is, I haven't looked at the numbers in a little bit. I think it's something like 35 or 40% of Kaggle users in any given month took a Kaggle Learn course, either that month or the previous month. So there's all this content that's getting created, and a really large fraction of it is by people who wouldn't have been able to create that content if they had not taken our courses. And so I'm really proud of that. Like I said, there's this advanced course, machine learning explainability. It gets very little use, but I've had a lot of people tell me that that they think it's a really, tell me how great it is. Just in the last week, I met someone who said that he recommends it to people who he works with at least once a week because they are starting to do machine learning, but they can't make sense of their models, and they come to him and say, like, how do I know if this is if this thing is working in a reasonable way? And he says that he recommends it every day or every week, and it's like made his job much easier because he doesn't have to try and explain these things himself. I've had a few people who have told me like how much they appreciate it. There's a guy, Hamil Hussein, who's a fantastic data scientist at GitHub, and he was also complimenting me on it. So the frequency with which that advanced course gets recommended is quite exciting to me. I think machine learning explainability is a really important topic. Our data visualization course, I think, is just a really interesting course that was put together not by me, but by the person who's now in charge of Kaggle Learn, Alexis Cook.
Yeah.
And I think she had experience creating courses. She'd worked at Udacity before coming to Kaggle, but she like really came into her own on just creating like the most interesting exercises, so that I think the exercises that she's creating today are more interesting than any of the stuff that I did earlier in the history of Kaggle Learn, and I'm really proud that it got handed off to someone who's doing such a good job with it.
Awesome. If you were to pick one thing that maybe Kaggle Learn or MOOCs broadly miss for data science aspirants who are using them, what would that be, and how can we fulfill that?
I've been surprised at the number of people who I know who either went to data science boot camps or basically were trying to get into the field of data science, and then their first job was not building really high-powered machine learning models, but was instead just handling massive amounts of data, maybe in Spark, and then trying to build pipelines so that when someone changes the schema in some database somewhere, it doesn't cause all these errors to like propagate through and break. And then that would be their first job. And then if they did do machine learning, they would get a title of something like machine learning engineer rather than data scientist. And that's, again, if we have a machine learning model and we want to serve it so that a lot of people can use it, how do we do that in a way that like doesn't break when we request a prediction and the data is of the wrong type, or doesn't have really varied latency, where sometimes it's like a few milliseconds and sometimes it's a few seconds. And so a lot of people are going into this field of machine learning engineering. I think that how do we get models deployed? How do we ensure they keep working? How do we handle really, really large data sets so that we can narrow them down into something that's at least small enough to be used with machine learning is really valuable. And there are probably MOOCs about that, but I haven't seen them. And so I think this general field of data engineering and machine learning engineering is probably the one place that we've missed out the most. And part of the challenge is that for a lot of that stuff, you can't do it in a notebook.
Yeah.
There's like, you need an interface where you can have a whole library of 50 different Python files. You, in many cases, need access to a lot of compute. And that's just not the interface of a lot of the platforms that MOOCs have right now. So that's all right. I don't know exactly how to solve that problem, to create a data science engineering course where you could deal with that demand for computational power and that need for complexity. But I think that's probably the thing that we could most do to improve this like the kinds of education that are available online.
I think that's where your advice of getting a job and getting your hands dirty first comes in. Because
Yeah.
again, the definition of a data scientist varies so much across every industry, every company, literally.
Yeah, totally.
Now, coming to your new work as a data scientist and CEO, can you tell us more about Decision.ai and what's it's all about?
Yeah. A lot of this is, like I said, I did consulting for some period of time, and I got to see a lot of applications in real business. The field is also so young that a really large fraction of people who are getting into the field come at it from a university or college education, or they come at it through MOOCs, or they come at it through maybe Kaggle competitions. And so they've had a lot of experience either on some theory, or if they do it through Kaggle competitions, it's a little more applied, and that is training models. But when I think back to where I actually saw this stuff get applied in businesses, there are a couple of areas that are just really undertaught and as a result underprioritized. So one of those is the software engineering of getting these models into production. That's not my specialty, and that's not what we do. The second part, which I think is at least as important, and I'm just constantly shocked as I started thinking about it more, that we don't see more attention paid to this, is how do we take our model and use it to make better decisions? So let me give you an example. And let me give you a few examples, because I think a lot of times I'll give one example and people have trouble sort of extrapolating what's that look like in other cases.
Mm-hmm.
So a hotel or airline has a bunch of tickets, or either tickets for an airline or hotel rooms if they're for a hotel. If they don't sell those by the time a flight takes off, or by the time by the date that someone was staying in the hotel, then they don't make any money off that sort of inventory just vanishes. So something that both those industries do today is they use machine learning to predict for each hotel room in the future, or for each airline flight in the future, how much demand is there. So let's say I'm an airline, and I could say I can either sell X many tickets for $400 a ticket, or Y many tickets for $500 a ticket, and then they use all this fancy machine learning to forecast how many tickets they can sell at each price. And then the next step is, how do you determine which of those numbers is better? And if you've got a flight that takes off in 90 days, there's all this complex dynamic optimization to figure out, is it better to sell fewer tickets that are higher priced today and have more tickets left over, and then what the right thing to do then is, well, it depends on what will my demand be tomorrow, and what will my demand be 2 days, 3 days, 4 days from now. And so to account for all of this, to do all this optimization and make the most revenue in a world with a lot of uncertainty and dynamic uncertainty is quite hard. And so we are trying to help companies who could be using machine learning today to make predictions actually go from I've got a prediction to I've got a good decision or a good decision-making rule that actually improves my bottom line. The very first call that I had with someone just trying to, after I started this company, was with a company, financial services company. They're building a phone app, and their phone app is going to show, depending on what you're doing in their app, it's going to show a marketing or promotional message at the bottom of the screen.
Okay.
And I said, well, how are you determining which message to show? And they are currently planning to use, they've got a bunch of messages. They're going to use a machine learning model to forecast which message is someone most likely to click on. Now, that's not a very good decision-making rule, because you could have one message that someone is a little more likely to click on, But if they click on it, it doesn't provide a lot of value either to them or to the financial services company. It's like, oh, kind of convenient, like reminder. And then you can have some other message where someone is going to click on it. There's a little less click on it, but if they do, they are likely to do something that's either very valuable to them or very valuable to the company. And so the idea of just using like the easiest thing to predict is not improving your bottom line. And to do a better job on improving your bottom line is in many cases a hard problem. And that's, again, something that I've thought about a lot in the last year, even before creating Decision.ai. But now founded a company around it because I think I have a really good approach towards doing this type of dynamic optimization in an environment where you've got a lot of unknowns. You need to weigh different trade-offs. Maybe being wrong in one direction is much better or worse than being wrong in some other direction. But we really want to optimize for the thing that the business cares about, not something which is easy to turn into a machine learning model.
You also mentioned you went from 3 different industries, hotel, airlines, to finances, to apps. How do you decide what industry are you going to target, and which all industries do you target?
Yeah. So first of all, I left Google about a month ago to start this company. So we are in the very, very early stages of this. The application that I currently feel is a couple of applications that I think are really, really compelling. So one of them is in supply chain management for food. Okay. So you run a restaurant, and if you order too much of an ingredient, then it's going to spoil, or maybe you order less the next week, but now the food you serve is not as fresh. And if you order too little of it, then someone comes and says, I'd like to get a plate of whatever, the pasta or the chicken, and you say, sorry, we're out of it. And so for them to figure out the right amount of each ingredient to send to each of their locations is a hard problem. And even if I had a machine learning model and it predicted you're going to need 100 pounds of rice or 1,000 pounds of rice in the next week, does that mean you buy exactly 1,000 pounds, or do you buy a little bit more, knowing that you can just store it, and then maybe you need to, so this is all it. And then they sometimes have shipping delays, so that maybe you should actually order more rice than you expect to need because you want to be prepared in case the shipment comes late the following week. And so there are all these moving parts. It requires a lot of different models that you can stitch together. And so I think it's a technically interesting problem to figure out how you account for shipping delays and forecasting demand and forecasting all these different pieces of that decision, forecasting changes in cost. But then also it's really, really important for them to get it right. If they overstock to keep it around, then the food's less fresh. And for some restaurants, they're really concerned about that. So that's true for restaurants, true for food manufacturers too. I talked to someone who makes a bottled beverage, but they want their ingredients to be fresh. They want to ship it to a store quickly and then have someone buy it and drink it soon after, so that the drink is fresh. So I think anything with supply chain management for food is something that we're really interested in. But at the same time, I'm still talking to people in a lot of different areas. Ad tech being one of them, retail being one of them. Still trying to figure out what our focus is going to be, and some of that is some of that is still to be determined. But the people I've talked to, where I'm most struck by how much they will benefit from combining machine learning, being able to stitch together a lot of different models, and then do optimization to make the best decisions. Is a lot of that is in supply chain management for food.
Okay. Out of curiosity, how big is your team right now, and what's the team size?
Yeah, right now it is 2 people.
Okay.
We intend to build a piece of software at some point, maybe a year from now. But in the meantime, we're doing pilot projects to figure out. I mean, a lot of that is coming back to your previous question of, well, what are the applications where people benefit from our approach the most? Um, I think that it's probably the rule rather than the exception of people who are using machine learning today for them to be able to benefit from our approach, which takes a bigger picture view of how they apply machine learning, potentially a view where we say the thing you care about doesn't all fit into one machine learning model, and we need to find a way of combining them. But we will, I think, a lot to learn and to iterate on in the next year, and then we'll expand once we have had a few cases where we make customers wildly successful, and we say, okay, now we're ready to build a product so that anyone can do that without our help. But in the next year or so, we're just going to be doing pilot projects for customers to help them use our approach.
Okay. So what part of the operations do you handle right now, and what does a day currently in your life look like?
Yeah, we are. Like I said, we're so early on. At this point, I am still trying to just sell our first project. We have a few people who we're in the middle of conversations with. I think it's quite likely that a couple of weeks from now, we'll have someone signed on for the first project, and at that point, my colleague and I will just be focused on taking their data and building the machine learning models, working with people in their business so that we understand their business, can build all the domain knowledge they know into all the machine learning models, make sure those models connect in the right ways, make sure that we are building visualizations that even not just their data scientists, but people who are just business people can understand and to help them make better decisions.
Okay. So I have two questions that I personally struggle with while I worked as a freelancer. How do you personally get the word out there? And secondly, in terms of pricing, so it's literally a project that you're working on and you're not a salaried employee. How do you decide how much is a project worth? Because the company itself might not have a good idea of how much, what the project is going to be worth after they invest into, or maybe while they outsource it.
Yeah. So you had two questions. So one is how much is the project worth? And what was the first question again?
How do you put the word out there? How do you attract customers?
Yeah. So first I should say it's unclear that I'll tell you what I'm doing. It's unclear that I have a great approach. I do have the good fortune of, because of my work on Kaggle, because of my work on DataCamp, for a while I was, I did consulting for a while. I have a lot of connections on social media. I've met a lot of people in the field. I've been in the field. I've been working in the field of machine learning for about 10 years, and so a lot of it is just going through connections that I have. And either people talk to them about how I could help their company, or tell them the types of things I'm working on and see if they know others, sort of friends of friends. I think that's a harder strategy for someone who hasn't been working in the field for so long.
I think that's how your advice of building a portfolio, and if you can, and you did write a lot of blog posts, but someone who's just getting into might write some blog posts, and that's how the internet knows what you're up to, and people start talking to you by default on any social media where you put it out.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And then there is some extent to which I use LinkedIn and I try to find people who are geographically close to me who are working. So I said I'm interested in supply chain management for food. So that'd be food manufacturers, large restaurant chains, and so on. So there is some extent to which I proactively reach out to them with an offer to talk to them about what we do. We created a page. It's Decision.ai, and I posted that on social media, and that got a lot of it got a lot of traffic. I think there was 4 or 5 days where it was getting about 150 or 160 people an hour.
Wow.
And so that got a lot of traffic, and we had a contact form that people could fill out at the bottom of that. And so I got a lot of contacts. I think, if you do something that you're interested, that you think people will find interesting, it probably makes sense to put a contact form at the bottom of it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder if you're hosting it on GitHub, and probably hard if you're hosting it on Kaggle. But even just a call to action saying, if you found this interesting, here's my email address, probably can't hurt. That seems like a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But I'm still actively trying to figure out what the best way is to find the first people that we work with. And then the second part of your question was, how do I know what it's worth? I think both questions are questions where I happen to be in a very fortunate place. Because our goal is to build a product in the long run, and we're thinking of these primarily as like proof points that we're going to learn a lot from. We have I've been working in the field for a long time. I have some flexibility to charge more than I think most data scientists could charge. And at the same time, because I'm thinking about this as for the long term, if it helps us get into a project that we think is really valuable, or where we really want to be able to say, here's an example of the success we've had, we will have the flexibility to charge less than I historically would have charged for consulting, just as part of my long-term strategy for the company. So I think the real answer is I don't know.
That question actually originates from the fact that I used to think a lot about how should I charge my clients while I was an individual freelancer. But I think it comes through experience. You maybe talk to other people who working in the same field, and they give you an idea, and then you try to assess where you are in the field.
That sounds exactly right. Where it's just valuable to know other people who are in similar positions.
And like you said, cold emailing, at least for this podcast episode, did work, and it works pretty well on any social media. If your sincerity comes across in any message, I think it's helpful. You might not get a customer right out of it, like you said, but you might get to know them through their connections if the conversation goes well.
So are you saying that you have had success cold emailing?
I have. Okay. And for example, even for this episode, it happened through cold email.
Well, okay. I guess cold emailing for this podcast is probably, I think you might be surprised. It's probably not as cold as it would at first seem. Many of us know who you are. Like this podcast is starting to develop a name for itself. We see this on Twitter. It's so. I think it's not quite as cold an email as you might think it is.
Okay, but also in retrospect, also for freelancing, it did work okay for me. What I tried to ensure was my sincerity would come across in its purity in the message whenever I reach out to anyone.
That's great. That's great that it worked. Any other recommendations that you would have for either me or listeners about just being sincere?
Honestly, I think I was trying to do two things: reaching out to a lot of people and doing community work while writing a few blog posts. So those feedbacks would factor into it, and that sort of helped me create a profile.
That's great.
Okay. Now, for anyone from the audience who'd like to get in touch with you, could you mention the platform through which we could get in talks with you?
Yeah. So for someone who wants to talk directly to me, my email address is dan@decision.ai.
Okay.
But I'm also Dan_S_Becker on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm on probably the only platform that I use that frequently. drop me a line either on Twitter or through email.
Also, go check out Decision.ai's website. You'll also find a contact forum there.
Yep, that's right. And then for anyone who wants more depth about what we do, that page y.decision.ai, I think is, I think we were more technical and transparent about what we do than many and more detailed than many companies are. I think it's something that it's, even if you don't work with us, I think it's a point of view about how machine learning should be used that a lot of people really benefit from.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan, for joining me on the podcast. And thank you for all of your community contributions from your previous life and previous jobs.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.